Kash Patel's voice ricocheted across the studio, sharp, heated, and relentless. His finger jabbed the air like a weapon, his words tumbling out faster, louder, harsher with every breath. Viewers watching at home could almost feel the spit flying, the fury mounting. It wasn't debate, it was an eruption, a tirade dressed as conviction, force masquerading as truth. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett. Not a muscle moved, not an eye flickered. She sat perfectly still, her gaze locked, unblinking, steady as stone. While Patel's volume rose to a fever pitch, Crockett's calm grew heavier, thicker, more commanding by contrast. The louder he grew, the smaller he seemed. The calmer she stayed, the more powerful her presence became. The tension in the room was unbearable. Even the moderators shifted in their chairs, torn between jumping in or letting the storm play out. The audience backed tight, leaning forward, couldn't take their eyes off the duel. And then, the hook. Patel slammed his final point down with a voice-cracking shout, convinced his dominance was sealed. He leaned back, almost smug, waiting for Crockett to stumble, but she didn't. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she leaned forward ever so slightly, eyes narrowing not in anger, but in razor focus. The studio, once filled with Patel's thunder, now sat in breathless silence. Viewers at home felt it too. It was the pause before the lightning strike, and that's when the realization spread. Unspoken, but undeniable, Kash Patel thought volume could win. What happened next left him speechless and the audience roaring. Millions would soon clip it, share it, replay it, over dinner tables and group chats across every corner of the internet. People would marvel at how Crockett dismantled chaos without raising her voice. But not yet, for now. The screen froze in tension, the comeback hanging in the air like a blade waiting to drop. Because before we reveal that unforgettable line, we need to rewind back into the roots of this clash, into the stakes that made it more than a viral moment. To understand why this mattered, we have to see the path that led Patel into rage and Crockett into unshakable calm. But before we reveal that unforgettable line, let's rewind and see why this clash mattered so much. The clash wasn't happening in a vacuum. It unfolded in a moment when America itself felt stretched thin. Every headline dripping with division. Every broadcast carrying the weight of a nation wrestling with truth and deception. The political climate was volatile, and live television had become the new battleground where reputations could be made or destroyed in the span of a soundbite. Kash Patel walked into that studio not just as a pundit, but as a soldier of loyalty, a figure molded in the Trump era, celebrated in some circles for his fierce allegiance, infamous in others for his unapologetic combativeness. He had built a brand on never backing down, on wielding volume like a sword and certainty like armor. To his base, that bravado was strength. To his critics, it was bluster hiding weakness. Either way, Patel was predictable. When cornered, he came out swinging. Jasmine Crockett was his opposite in every sense. A congresswoman rising with a different kind of fire, not the fire of rage, but of conviction. An attorney turned lawmaker. She was known for her sharp wit and steady presence. Where Patel thrived in disruption, Crockett thrived in clarity. Where he reached for insults, she reached for truth. Her growing reputation among progressives was built on the kind of calm that exposed chaos for what it was. The stakes on this night couldn't have been higher. The cameras weren't just recording for the live audience. They were feeding a machine of clips, memes, and viral soundbites that could define legacies in seconds. Every gesture, every pause, every slip of the tongue could be magnified 1,000 times over once social media got hold of it. And Patel knew it. Crockett knew it. Everyone in that studio knew it. That's why Patel came in hot, voice raised, words sharpened, aiming to dominate the space before Crockett could plant her flag. It was his pattern: overwhelm, interrupt, and repeat until the noise drowned out nuance. For years, it had worked. He'd rattled journalists, silenced panelists, and spun narratives with sheer aggression. But this time, he faced someone different. Crockett didn't bite. She didn't fidget or falter. She simply absorbed the storm, her stillness itself becoming the story. Viewers could sense the contrast sharpening with every passing second. Chaos versus composure. Fury versus focus. A man desperate to control the moment against a woman prepared to let it play out until it collapsed on its own. And here's the truth: the audience at home had no idea what was about to happen. They couldn't yet see the line forming in Crockett's mind, the calm precision loading like an arrow pulled tight in the bow. They didn't know that within moments, Patel's bluster would be met with a reply so devastating, so unshakably dignified, that it would reverberate far beyond that studio. Viewers had no idea they were about to witness a takedown destined for history. But to understand why Patel came in swinging, to understand the armor he thought would protect him from a moment like this, we have to step back. We have to trace his rise, his contradictions, and the bravado he believed was impenetrable. To understand why Patel came in swinging, we have to look at his rise and the armor he thought would protect him. To understand the storm that erupted in that studio, you first have to understand the man who walked in determined to dominate it. Kash Patel's journey was not one of obscurity, nor was it one of quiet service. It was a path carved by ambition, sharpened by loyalty, and at times clouded by arrogance. Patel began as a lawyer, a detail-driven litigator with a sharp mind and a hunger for influence. In another world, he might have stayed in courtrooms, building a reputation on his legal acumen alone, but politics drew him in. It offered a bigger stage, a brighter spotlight, and the intoxicating promise of power. That hunger carried him from the shadows of legal briefs into the very center of one of the most turbulent political movements America had ever seen. His break came under Donald Trump. To the former president, loyalty was everything, and Patel delivered it in spades. He became not just an advisor, but a fierce protector, a man willing to echo Trump's words with conviction, even when they bent or broke the truth. In return, he was elevated, trusted, and positioned as a warrior in the culture wars that defined an era. Patel quickly built a reputation for his combativeness. He wasn't the type to sit back and let conversations unfold. He charged into them, often interrupting, speaking over, and bulldozing his way to control the narrative. For his supporters, it was a thrill, a sign of strength, a refusal to let the other side dictate terms. For his critics, it was arrogance masquerading as intellect, an endless barrage of sound and fury that too often drown out substance. The contradictions in Patel's character ran deep. On one hand, he was undeniably intelligent, a skilled attorney, a strategist who understood how narrative shaped power. On the other, his intelligence was too often weaponized in service of blind loyalty. He had the tools to argue, to persuade, but instead chose to repeat talking points like mantras, confident that volume could substitute for truth. It was the paradox at the heart of his persona: sharpness dulled by obedience, brilliance obscured by arrogance. He had tells to those small, cutting gestures that audiences came to recognize. The smug confidence curling at the corner of his lips when he thought he'd landed a blow. The dismissive flick of the hand when opponents spoke, as if their words didn't even warrant acknowledgement. The rehearsed rhythm of his talking points, polished not to enlighten, but to overwhelm. These weren't accidents. They were part of his arsenal, the performance of dominance. And in many arenas, it worked. Patel had faced off against journalists and lawmakers alike, leaving them flustered and off balance. He relished the role of disruptor, the man who could turn a civil exchange into a shouting match and walk away claiming victory. He had crushed debates before, won arguments not by depth but by sheer force. His playbook was simple: stay loud, stay loyal, never admit weakness. But there was a hidden cost to that playbook, one Patel never seemed to notice. Over time, the bluster began to expose itself. The louder he shouted, the more transparent it became that he had little new to offer. The more he bulldozed, the more obvious it became that his power depended not on substance but on spectacle. To those paying attention, the cracks were already showing. That night in the studio, Patel carried the same energy that had defined his rise, his voice, sharp and unrelenting, his confidence radiating through every jab and interruption. He came armed with the belief that his tactics would work yet again, that his opponent would shrink, stumble, or simply fail to match his ferocity. He came expecting the script he'd written for himself so many times before: chaos in his favor, noise as his shield, spectacle as his weapon. But something was different. This time, the cameras captured more than his volume. They captured the contrast. The audience noticed the performance, the predictability of the same old tricks. And across from him, there was no rattled journalist, no overwhelmed panelist. Instead, there was a woman who met his storm with silence, who refused to bend under the weight of his interruptions. For Kash Patel, this was supposed to be another victory lap, another opportunity to wield his voice like a hammer. Instead, it would become the moment his playbook betrayed him. Because the louder he got, the clearer the contrast became. The more he tried to dominate, the more his opponent revealed the emptiness of his tactics. He had crushed debates before, but this time, his playbook would fail. Because across from him sat someone forged in a very different fire. Before the clash unfolded under the blinding lights of live television, there was Jasmine Crockett, the woman who would meet Kash Patel's storm with the kind of calm forged only through years of struggle and service. To understand why her silence carried more weight than his shouting, you have to go back to where it began, in courtrooms, on picket lines, and in the unglamorous trenches of justice. Crockett didn't rise on shortcuts or privilege. She came up through sacrifice, the kind most people never see, the kind that leaves scars but builds steel. Before Congress, before viral moments, She was an attorney fighting for people who had little to give, and even less protection. The clients who walked into her office weren't wealthy corporations or powerful lobbyists. They were everyday people, many of them poor, marginalized, or unheard. And more often than not, she fought their battles knowing full well she wouldn't be compensated anywhere near what the work deserved. But Crockett wasn't chasing a paycheck. She was chasing justice. And justice, for her, was never an abstract idea, it was personal. It was the single mother who couldn't afford representation. It was the young man targeted because of the color of his skin. It was the families navigating a system that seemed designed to grind them down. Crockett stood for them not because it was easy, but because someone had to. Her activism grew alongside her legal work. She didn't just argue cases, she marched, she organized. She lent her voice when others were too afraid. In those moments, she wasn't building a resume. She was building resilience. Every chant, every courthouse battle, every sleepless night preparing for trial added a layer to her armor. She learned how to take blows without losing her balance, how to hold her ground when the odds seemed impossible. It was those battles that carved out the composure the world would later witness. Her calmness wasn't natural-born serenity, it was survival, earned through years of standing toe-to-toe with injustice and refusing to blink. Where others saw confrontation as chaos, Crockett saw it as familiar terrain. Noise didn't shake her. She had already faced louder storms in the form of stacked odds, systemic bias, and relentless scrutiny. The leap from attorney to congresswoman wasn't a career move, it was a continuation of the same mission. Crockett brought her grit to Washington, refusing to be intimidated by the grandeur of the Capitol or the entrenched powers that filled its halls. She didn't come to play by their rules. She came to rewrite them, to carry the voices of those who so often went ignored. That authenticity made her stand out in a city addicted to performance. While others polished sound bites or crafted images for the cameras, Crockett leaned into her truth. She wasn't interested in pretending, in staging theatrics, or in chasing applause. Her power came from honesty, sometimes raw, sometimes sharp, but always real. It was the antithesis of Kash Patel's bluster, a contrast that would become glaring when the two finally collided. And make no mistake, Crockett had been tested long before Patel ever raised his voice at her. She had faced the ridicule of being underestimated, the skepticism of those who doubted a black woman from humble beginnings could rise through the ranks of law and politics. She had faced financial sacrifice, pouring her time and energy into clients who couldn't pay her but needed her nonetheless. She had endured the exhaustion of fighting systems designed to exhaust her. Each challenge, each scar, became a lesson. Don't flinch when the powerful sneer. Don't fold when the noise rises. Don't abandon truth, even when lies seem louder. That was the secret to her poise. It wasn't about ignoring the storm, it was about recognizing it, understanding it, and refusing to let it dictate her next move. Where Patel's confidence came from loyalty to a man and a movement, Crockett's strength came from loyalty to people and principles. He had memorized his talking points, she had lived her truths. He was fueled by performance. She was grounded in purpose. The night of the debate, as Patel prepared to unleash his arsenal of interruptions and insults, Crockett sat steady. Because she wasn't just a congresswoman in that moment, she was the sum of every client she'd defended, every protest she'd marched, every injustice she'd challenged. Her past had prepared her for this exact storm, and she was ready. Patel came with noise. Crockett came with silence sharpened into steel. And then, the cameras rolled. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter as Kash Patel leaned forward, his voice climbing, his finger jabbing the air like a weapon. The words came fast, rehearsed, sharp-edged, designed not to illuminate, but to overwhelm. He hurled accusations one after another, claims of hypocrisy, digs at policy, personal barbs, meant to rattle more than to persuade. His cadence was that of a prosecutor on overdrive. But there was no jury to sway, only millions of viewers watching the storm he was trying to conjure. Answer the question, Patel barked, his tone more command than inquiry. He didn't wait for answers, didn't leave space for rebuttals. Each interruption was louder than the last, a wall of sound meant to crush composure. The moderators tried to cut in, their voices thin against his thunder. But Patel bulldozed over them and through it all Jasmine Crockett sat still. Her eyes locked on him, steady, unblinking. She didn't reach for her notes, didn't flinch at the volume, didn't allow so much as a raised brow to betray irritation. Where Patel moved with restless energy, tapping the desk, leaning forward, cutting off words before they could land, Crockett remained composed. Her posture a quiet declaration of control. The audience shifted in their seats. You could almost feel their discomfort through the cameras. That collective question rising in living rooms across the country. How long could she take it? Who would break first, the aggressor burning through energy like wildfire, with a calm figure refusing to be pulled into the flames. Patel's micro-expressions told a story his words couldn't conceal. The longer Crockett stayed silent, the more agitation crept into his face. His jaw tightened between phrases. His eyes flickered in frustration when she refused to react. He mistook her calmness for weakness, not realizing it was strength. Every second she didn't engage was another second. His composure frayed. At one point, his hand chopped the air so forcefully that the microphone picked up the thud of his palm hitting the desk. He shot her a grin that was meant to look triumphant but came off desperate. The kind of grin that masked the creeping fear of losing control. He was loud. Yes, but too loud, too insistent, as if he was trying to convince himself just as much as the audience. Crockett, meanwhile, gave the faintest of smiles. Not smug, not mocking, just a flicker of quiet confidence. The look of someone who has seen storms before and knows how they end. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to interrupt. She understood something Patel didn't. Silence can be the sharpest blade. The tension became unbearable. The moderators leaned in, almost pleading with their eyes for her to jump in. The audience watched with a mix of discomfort and anticipation, waiting for the inevitable snap, the breaking point where the confwade would crack under Patel's relentless barrage. But it never came. Instead, Crockett's stillness became its own performance, a counterpoint to Patel's chaos. And in that stillness, Patel began to unravel. His words grew less precise, his rhythm faltered. The more he repeated himself, the more the aggression seemed less like power and more like insecurity. The very tactics that had carried him through other debates, drowning opponents in noise, were backfiring. He was shouting into silence, and silence was winning. The audience could sense it. A murmur rippled through the studio. Not loud enough to interrupt, but enough to be felt. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, not wanting to miss the moment when the balance tipped. It was no longer just a debate. It was a test of wills, patience against pressure, truth against volume. And then after what felt like an eternity, Jasmine Crockett moved. Slowly, deliberately. She leaned toward her microphone. The crowd hushed instantly, sensing the shift, the turn they had been waiting for. Patel paused mid-sentence, his words hanging in the air, unsure if he had just overstepped. The silence stretched, electric. And just when Patel thought he had rattled her, Jasmine leaned into the microphone. The silence was deafening. Jasmine Crockett leaned into the microphone with the kind of deliberate slowness that told everyone watching she was in no rush, that she controlled the tempo now. Kash Patel, mid-gesture, froze, his hands suspended in the air. The audience shifted forward in their seats, as if they could physically inch themselves closer to the moment about to unfold. Crockett let the pause linger, her eyes steady on Patel. Every second stretched longer than the last, every heartbeat thudding in the chest of viewers both in the studio and at home. She inhaled once, softly, then began. "You know, Mr. Patel," she said, her voice even, unhurried, the opposite of his frantic cadence. "It's remarkable how much noise a man can make when he's terrified of the truth." The room stilled. Patel blinked once, then twice, as if the words hadn't fully registered. His lips parted, ready to fire back, but no sound came. Crockett continued, each sentence landing like a blade cloaked in velvet. "You've spent the last 10 minutes interrupting, pointing, shouting, thinking if you raised your voice high enough, maybe people would mistake it for facts. But here's the thing, shouting doesn't make you right, it just makes you loud." The audience gasped. A few scattered chuckles broke through the tension, quickly hushed as the gravity of her words sank in. Even the moderators, who had been struggling to rein Patel in, sat frozen, their hands hovering uselessly over their note cards. Crockett leaned back slightly, but her gaze never wavered. Her calmness was devastating precisely because it wasn't defensive. She wasn't scrambling to prove herself, wasn't rattled by his accusations. She was dissecting him in real time, piece by piece, with the kind of precision only someone deeply practiced in composure could deliver. "People watching tonight," she said, sweeping her eyes toward the cameras, "don't want more chaos. They don't want another politician talking over everyone else, trying to win by sheer volume. They want answers, they want honesty, they want dignity. And unfortunately for you, Mr. Patel, you can't fake any of that with a microphone." The crowd erupted, not into wild applause that wasn't allowed in the format, but into a low, audible murmur that filled the space like a rising tide. You could feel the shift, the collective recognition that the power dynamic had flipped entirely. Patel tried to interject, his mouth fumbling for words, but the timing betrayed him. Every attempt at rebuttal landed like static after a symphony. His bluster had nowhere to go. Crockett's calm truth had stripped it of force. And then came the moment, the mic drop line destined to be replayed millions of times. Crockett tilted her head, her voice still calm but sharpened now like steel wrapped in silk. You see, I don't need to shout to be heard. The truth is loud enough on its own. For a split second, the studio went utterly silent, the kind of silence where even breathing felt like a disruption. Patel blinked again, searching desperately for footing that no longer existed. The moderators glanced at one another, eyes wide, as if they were caught in the blast radius of what had just unfolded. And then, the spell broke, a ripple of sound swept through the audience, gasps, murmurs, stifled applause. On social media, live watchers clipped the moment instantly. Captions already being written. The truth is loud enough. Within seconds, it was becoming more than just a line. It was a rallying cry. Patel's shoulders slumped ever so slightly. He recovered enough to force a laugh, shaking his head. But the damage was done. His grin looked brittle now as earlier. Confidence shattered. No matter what he said next, it would sound offensive. Like patching a sinking ship with tape. Crockett didn't press further. That was the brilliance of it. She didn't need to. The comeback was complete, the scalpel sharp. Enough that anything more would have dulled its edge. She leaned back, folded her hands, and let the silence and the audience do the rest of the work. The moderators tried to regain control, stumbling through their notes. But even they seemed distracted, glancing repeatedly at Crockett with the kind of awe that follows a perfectly executed takedown. The audience buzzed, unable to contain their disbelief. For viewers at home, it was cinematic. They saw Patel, the seasoned partisan warrior, undone not by someone shouting louder but by someone refusing to play his game. They saw a woman embodying dignity in the face of chaos, flipping the script with a calmness that stung more than any insult ever could. Crockett had done more than just answer Patel. She had exposed him. She had turned his own volume into evidence against him, shown millions watching that fury without facts collapses under the weight of truth delivered calmly. The emotional payoff was immediate. You could almost feel audiences across the country nodding, smiling, cheering quietly in their living rooms. For every immigrant family tired of being shouted down. For every young activist frustrated by political noise drowning out real issues. For every person who had ever stayed calm in the face of arrogance, Crockett had just spoken for them. And Patel, he sat there blinking, his arsenal of sound reduced to silence. In the days and weeks to come, commentators would call it the velvet takedown, the comeback heard around the world. And the moment calm destroyed chaos. But in that instant, it was something simpler, something raw. The truth standing taller than noise. The debate continued, but the momentum never shifted back. Patel spoke again. But every word sounded smaller, as though even he could hear the echo of Crockett's line underneath his own voice. The moderators forced a transition to the next topic. But the audience wasn't thinking about policy anymore. They were replaying the moment in their heads, whispering it to one another. The truth is loud enough. And just like that, the storm Patel had tried to unleash was gone, dismantled by a calm voice that cut sharper than any shout. But the real shockwaves wouldn't stop in the studio. They erupted online. The studio lights hadn't even dimmed before the internet ignited. Twitter, now rebranded as X, was ablaze within minutes. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's line, "The truth is loud enough," on its own, spread like wildfire. The time-stamped video was clipped, subtitled, remixed, and reposted across feeds. Within the hour, hashtags began surging to the top of trending charts. Hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag Combeast chaos, and hashtag truth over noise. Each one carried its own storm of commentary, GIFs, and memes. Users didn't just share the clip, they transformed it. A meme of Patel's stunned face juxtaposed with Crockett's serene smile went viral instantly. TikTok creators layered her line over cinematic music, slow-motion edits, even gospel choirs swelling behind her words. On Instagram Reels, motivational accounts paired the moment with captions about dignity triumphing over arrogance. The comeback wasn't just being replayed, it was being reimagined into legend. And then came the headlines. By the next morning, digital news outlets blared dramatic summaries. Crockett schools Patel on live TV splashed across Politico's feed. The Huffington Post dubbed it the velvet takedown. Rolling Stone wrote, "When calm destroys chaos, Jasmine Crockett's viral debate moment." Even the Washington Post, usually restrained, ran with, "A rising star finds her voice and silences Patel." Cable networks looped the exchange endlessly, dissecting it frame by frame. Commentators replayed Crockett's composure, pointing out the unflinching eye contact, the calculated pause, the deliberate delivery. Body language experts were invited onto morning shows to explain how her stillness amplified the blow. Every expert had the same conclusion: Crockett didn't just win the exchange, she owned it. Celebrities piled on. Kerry Washington retweeted the clip with the caption, This is how you handle arrogance. Ava DuVernay wrote. Jasmine Crockett just gave a master class in grace under fire. Even unexpected figures chimed in. Shaquille O'Neal posted a laughing emoji followed by #Crockett clapback. And Trevor Noah broke down the moment on his podcast, calling it one of the cleanest takedowns I've ever seen. But perhaps most surprising were the voices from the other side of the aisle. A few conservative commentators, while still disagreeing with Crockett politically, admitted Patel had been outmaneuvered. One viral clip showed a Fox panelist reluctantly conceding, whether you like her or not, she handled him better than most people could. That rare acknowledgement only amplified the cultural gravity of the moment. Meanwhile, Patel was drowning in mockery. The internet spared him no mercy. One meme compared his wide-eyed silence to a buffering YouTube video. Another showed his face, with the caption, "When the Wi-Fi goes out mid-argument." The #Patel frozen trended briefly, alongside gifs of malfunctioning robots. What he had once prided himself on, his volume, his bluster, was now turned into comedic fodder. Crockett, on the other hand, was elevated almost instantly into icon status. Think pieces poured out. Why Jasmine Crockett's calm matters for America. The power of composure in the age of chaos. She wasn't just being praised for the comeback, she was being framed as a symbol for young women, especially women of color. Her composure in the face of Patel's aggression became a moment of representation, proof that dignity can triumph. Even under the harshest spotlight. At rallies, activists held up homemade signs with her line. University debate teams replayed the clip as a case study in strategy. On TikTok, immigrant families stitched the video with captions like, "This is why we teach our kids to stay calm when they try to shout you down." It resonated far beyond the debate stage. It became personal. By the end of the week, Crockett had gained hundreds of thousands of new followers across platforms. Her fundraising team reported a surge of small dollar donations, many with notes attached, "For the truth that was loud enough." Late-night host from Stephen Colbert to Jimmy Fallon replayed the moment with punchlines, but always with admiration in their tone. The cultural impact was undeniable. This wasn't just another viral clip destined to fade by the weekend. This felt larger, an emblem of something America had been craving: calmness in the face of chaos, substance standing taller than soundbites, dignity reclaiming space in a political landscape too often defined by noise. And yet, beneath the laughter, the memes, the applause, something deeper was happening. Crockett's moment wasn't just entertainment, it was planting seeds. Seeds of possibility, of shifting power, of a new narrative taking root. But to see why this moment carried weight far beyond the screen, we have to peel back the layers, because underneath the viral sensation was a story about identity, resilience, and what it means to stand tall in America today. Cliffhanger transition, and yet, beneath the laughter and memes, something deeper was happening. The firestorm of memes and headlines was loud, but what lingered beneath it all was something quieter, deeper, and far more enduring. Because this wasn't just about Kash Patel losing his footing, or Jasmine Crockett winning an argument. It was about what their clash revealed to a nation starved for clarity. That truth doesn't need theatrics, and dignity will always outlast arrogance. For years, politics in America has been treated like a stage, with those who shout the loudest often seizing the spotlight. Patel embodied that theater perfectly, finger-pointing, voice booming, performance polished to the point of predictability. He believed dominance came from drowning others out. Yet on that stage, in front of millions, his act fell apart. Why? Because across from him sat someone unwilling to play by his rules. Crockett proved that sometimes the strongest rebuttal isn't more noise, but less. Her silence in those moments before speaking wasn't weakness. It was power. Every second she waited forced the audience and Patel himself to sit in discomfort, to reckon with the void that bluster could not fill. And then, when she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of 1,000 interruptions unspoken. She reminded the country of something we too often forget. In an age of shouting, silence can be the sharpest weapon. This wasn't just Crockett's victory. It became a mirror for millions watching immigrants who have been told to stay quiet. Women talked over in boardrooms. Young activists dismissed as naive. Entire communities told their voices don't count. In Crockett's composure, they saw themselves. They saw proof that restraint isn't weakness, that patience isn't passivity, and that staying grounded in truth can shake the foundations of arrogance. Patel's outburst, for all its noise, evaporated within minutes. Crockett's response, for all its calm, will echo for years. That is the difference between performance and principle. One is fleeting, the other endures. And that endurance is what transforms a viral clip into a cultural moment. Think about the ripple effect. A young student watching in her living room sees that you don't have to scream to be heard. An immigrant father watching on his phone. After a long shift sees that dignity can hold its own even in hostile arenas, a teacher replays the clip for a debate class, pointing to Crockett's stillness as the very thing that won the exchange. These are not small ripples, they are waves, carrying the lesson outward, far beyond the studio where it began. And in those waves lies the larger truth. This wasn't just a takedown. It was a reminder of what leadership looks like when stripped of theatrics. Leadership isn't about overpowering opponents with noise. It's about standing so firmly in your truth that the noise collapses around you. Crockett embodied that, and whether viewers agreed with her politics or not, they felt it. Because at its core, the story wasn't about Democrat versus Republican or Crockett versus Patel. It was about something universal, something every human recognizes in their gut: the difference between distortion and truth, the difference between arrogance and dignity, the difference between chaos and calm. And in that difference lies the hope that maybe, just maybe, the future of our discourse doesn't belong to the loudest, but to the clearest. That maybe America's strength doesn't come from volume, but from conviction. Which leaves us with a question not just about this debate, but about all of us watching. When faced with arrogance, with noise, with distortion, how will we respond? Will we match chaos with chaos, or will we remember Crockett's lesson? That dignity is its own form of defiance. That calm can cut sharper than rage. That silence, when held with purpose, can speak louder than any scream. Cliffhanger transition, and that leaves one final question. What do we take from this moment? It began as just another fiery clash on live television. Kash Patel, the loyalist warrior, raising his voice and trying to bulldoze through the moment. But what unfolded left him blinking, the moderator frozen, and the audience roaring. Jasmine Crockett's calm, razor-sharp comeback wasn't just a response, it was a revelation. Patel had volume, Crockett had composure, and in the end, composure won. This is why her words spread like wildfire, why headlines declared her the victor, why social media crowned her the new symbol of grace under fire. It wasn't only about what she said, it was about how she said it. Unshaken, unbothered, rooted in a truth bigger than the noise in front of her. Patel shouted. Crockett stood tall, and the contrast told the whole story. Because at the heart of the showdown, the lesson was undeniable: chaos can roar, but dignity endures. That's the story millions saw in real time, and the story that will keep echoing long after the cameras stopped rolling. And here's where you come in. These moments of clarity, these flashes of truth cutting through the static, only grow stronger when we amplify them together. So if you believe dignity beats arrogance, if you believe truth will always outlast distortion, if you believe composure is the real power, then don't just watch. Be part of this movement. Subscribe, share, and join a community that refuses to let stories like this get buried under the noise. Because this isn't just commentary, it's a reminder, a rallying cry. And together, we can make sure the lesson of Jasmine Crockett's calm defiance is never silenced. Subscribe now and let's make composure louder than chaos.